8. Brinks mat robbery. Shortly before 7 o'clock in the morning on November 26, 1983, 6 men broke into the Brinks mat warehouse in London. They accessed the building with help from the security guard, Anthony Black, who was in on the robbery. Together, they tied up 2 other guards and forced them to enter their security codes under the threat of dousing them with gasoline and lighting them on fire. The thieves were under the impression that they were about to steal foreign money, but they instead happened upon 3.3 tons of gold bullion. Back then, the 6,800 ingots were worth around £26 million, the equivalent of around £100 million today. Unsure of how to convert straight gold into cash, the perpetrators called in some friends to help. They melted at least some of it down and mixed it with copper before selling it to various jewelers. A bank tipped authorities off to one of the suspects, who was making suspiciously large deposits. 2 of the 6 original conspirators, Mickey McAvoy and Brian Robinson, were convicted for their roles in the crime. They each received a 25-year prison sentence and were both released in 2000. The other 4 masterminds avoided criminal cases. Numerous others connected to the handling of the gold and money were also convicted of various crimes and handed punishments ranging from a 1-year suspended prison sentence to 14 years. Most of the gold was never found. 7. Toronto Pearson International Airport robbery. A new record was set in Canada in April 2023 when more than $15 million worth of gold and valuables were stolen at Toronto Pearson International Airport. Interestingly, it wasn't the largest theft the country had ever seen. In terms of total value, the haul is outranked by several other robberies, including the 2011 and 2012 thefts of more than 3,300 tons of maple syrup, valued at $18.7 million. But it was the largest gold heist in Canadian history, and police are still working to solve it. The thieves obviously did their research, and it's no secret that the airport is a popular shipping point for gold mined throughout Ontario. They were most likely expecting the haul to arrive in an aircraft container and be transported to a cargo holding facility, which is when authorities believe the robbery took place. In a statement, the airport clarified that the thieves didn't access any restricted areas within the airport itself, but that they accessed the public side of a warehouse that's leased to a third party and which falls outside the airport's security line. Officials have remained tight-lipped about most of the details of the crime, including what airline shipped the gold, where it came from, and where it was headed. But they did reveal that the missing container in question measured about 5 square feet, and they don't believe the public's in danger, according to Peel Regional Police Inspector Stephen Dufstein, who said during a press conference that it was too early to tell whether any organized crime groups were involved. By then, the Toronto Sun had already reported that police believed organized criminals played a role in the heist, and given the level of sophistication that the crime was carried out with, the theory makes sense. But Dufstein stressed the importance of investigators keeping their eyes open to all avenues and looking at the situation from multiple angles. Who do you think is most likely responsible for the heist? Share your theories in the comments below, but be sure to subscribe first. 6. British Bank of the Middle East. As the Lebanese Civil War entered its 9th month in 1976, the capital of Beirut was split into east and west sections, which were divided by a demarcation line known as the Green Line. Located along the line was the British Bank of the Middle East. It was worth around $300 million at the time, roughly $2 billion today, yet was unguarded amid the fighting. Taking advantage of the war's distractions, a group of 8 heavily armed thieves broke into the bank by busting a hole through the wall of a neighboring Catholic church. Before plundering the building, the robbers fired dozens of shells, causing a skirmish to break out. With the war's combatants distracted, the men drilled a hole through the bank's steel-reinforced vault. The perpetrators made off with several vehicles worth of cash, jewels, stocks, and hundreds of 99.9% pure gold bars, weighing 27.6 pounds each. Altogether, the spoils were worth an estimated $775 million. To this day, the stolen money and valuables have never been traced. And while fingers have been pointed in multiple directions, not a single one of the thieves has ever been caught, much less identified. In addition to being the biggest ever bank robbery in history, it remains one of the most mysterious. 5. Packers Gold. One weekend in April 1995, a master criminal stole more than £600 of gold from a hidden safe belonging to Australian media mogul Kerry Packer. It probably would never have happened if Packer's security team hadn't been hanging out at a club next door that night. But it did, and the safecracker did such a good job that police could even think of very few people who were even capable of carrying out the crime. At the top of their list was the boyfriend of Packer's former secretary. Known only as Mr. X, he showed no signs of a sudden windfall, and investigators were unable to connect him with any evidence related to the heist. For years, he continued to drive a beater while making no obvious changes to his lifestyle. The moment Mr. X realized police were onto him, he became even more closed off, ensuring he gave them absolutely nothing to go on in their attempts to nail him for the robbery. For the members of law enforcement who were tasked with carrying out surveillance on him, it was nothing short of frustrating. Even when police pulled Mr. X over in an attempt to rattle his cage, he refused to give up any of his secrets. His silence paid off. To this day, nobody's been arrested for the robbery, although Mr. X remains the top and only suspect. If he's still alive, he's in his mid-80s, which means it's very likely that he's not only gotten away with the crime, but that he'll take the details of it with him to the grave. 4. The Great Bullen Robbery. While en route from England to Paris in May 1855, 224 pounds of heavily secured gold bullion and coins were stolen from a train somewhere between London Bridge and the port town of Folkestone. The missing valuables weren't discovered until the empty safes, which required 2 keys to open, arrived in Paris. Authorities were at a loss to name any suspects or to pinpoint exactly when and where the treasure vanished. 4 men, including Southeastern Railroad employees William Tester and James Burgess, were responsible for the crime. The other 2 thieves who masterminded the heist were career criminal Edward Agar and former railroad employee William Pierce, who had been fired for gambling. They accessed the safes containing the gold by taking wax impressions of the keys and making their own copies ahead of time. The thieves split the proceeds of the heist equally among themselves and each spent it differently. Some of the men invested their share, while Pierce used his to open a betting shop. After being arrested for an unrelated crime later that year and facing life in a far-flung penal colony, Agar asked Pierce to pass along some of his money to his ex-girlfriend, Fanny Kay. Pierce initially agreed, but failed to follow through on his end of the deal. Desperate for money, Kay ratted on the thieves. Pierce was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor, while Tester and Burgess were both sent to a penal colony for 14 years. 3. The Summer Bliss Robbery. During the early morning hours one day in late 2012, 6 or more men, hooded and masked, wearing jackets that said police on them, boarded a fishing boat called the Summer Bliss in the Caribbean island nation of Curacao. They struck the captain in the head, loaded 70 gold bars weighing 476 pounds total into 3 vehicles, and drove off. The entire heist was carried out in just a few minutes. Shortly after the crime, police spokesman Reggie Huggins declined to specify who owned the gold or where it was being transported, but he clarified that it was a legal shipment, despite the ramshackle appearance of the Summer Bliss and its lack of visible security. Government officials had been alerted in advance of the gold's arrival, according to standard security protocols. They were guarding the area and knowingly allowed the thieves to enter after mistaking them for customs officials. This was a bit odd, according to USA Today, which pointed out that in Curacao, official police jackets would bear the word police in Papiamento, one of the island's 3 main languages, rather than police in English. Authorities arrested multiple suspects over the following months, but failed to secure any convictions due to conflicting reports and inconsistent witness accounts. Perhaps even more strangely, the gold's intended recipient never came forward. 2. Cen Aerodrome Robbery. Throughout the 1930s, the world was entangled in the grips of the Great Depression. Despite these hard times and the desperation that often came along with them, the Croydon Aerodrome Airport in London only kept one security guard on duty. Meanwhile, large amounts of valuables, including gold shipments, passed through the airport on a regular basis. Security guard Francis Johnson was working the night shift on March 6th. He had one of two known sets of keys to the strong room, where valuables were held before proceeding to their next destination. The other set of keys was locked in the superintendent's drawer. At around 4 o'clock a.m., Johnson went to receive a flight. At the time, the strong room was locked with 3 boxes of gold bullion and coins from a delivery earlier that day inside. A few hours later, Johnson found the strong room unlocked and the gold missing. Luckily for the police, an observant passerby had taken down the license plate number of a taxi they saw outside the airport during the window of time when the gold was stolen. The cab driver, George Mason, told investigators that he'd driven 4 men, including one nicknamed Little Harry, to the airport. Mason said the men had persuaded him to drive them and their stolen gold to the home of another suspect, a 47-year-old artist named Cecil Swanland. Detectives seized a large amount of evidence from Swanland's home, although most of the gold was never found. The fact that the suspect was known to be broke yet had made numerous recent expensive purchases only further pointed toward his involvement in the heist. Swanland had already served time for 2 previous robberies, was charged in connection with the heist, along with 38-year-old Silvio Shonk Mazzada and a man in his 70s named John O'Brien. The court found Swanland guilty and sentenced him to 7 years in prison. Mazzada and O'Brien were both acquitted. Despite the conviction, unanswered questions continue to surround the robbery, including where the gold went and what was done with it. 1. The Flying Bandit. The second biggest gold heist in Canadian history was carried out in 1966 by a bush pilot and career bank robber named Ken Leishman. Infamously named the Flying Bandit, he spent enough time watching planes at Winnipeg International Airport to gain some basic knowledge of how gold shipments worked, and enough time in prison to formulate a plan for robbing a gold shipment. Already too well known to be the muscle behind the operation, Leishman recruited 3 accomplices. Paul Grenkow posed as a salesperson while acting as a lookout at Red Lake to spot when the next gold shipment left Winnipeg. After receiving the word that a large shipment was en route to Winnipeg, Paul Grenkow's brother, Richard Grenkow, and John Berry drove out to the tarmac in a stolen Air Canada truck while wearing fake Air Canada coveralls and met the incoming flight. Posing as employees, the men convinced workers on the arriving flight that there had been a change of plans and that the gold was bound for a charter plane that would be leaving the airport within the next hour. Barry and Grenkow seemed legit, so the staff members loaded the gold onto their Air Canada truck and the pair drove off. They transferred the gold to Leishman's vehicle, then took it to the home of lawyer Harry Backlin, who was on vacation but had allowed the thieves to use his house as a waypoint along their transport route. A 2-day blizzard prevented the men from moving the gold to a farm as planned, and Backlin had no interest in being connected with the crime, so the stolen loot had to leave his home. Lacking any other options, the co-conspirators buried most of the gold in Backlin's backyard. It wasn't long before police investigated Backlin for being a known associate of Leishman. They unearthed the gold, and Leishman was once again arrested for committing a high-profile robbery. He escaped custody twice while awaiting trial, including on one occasion when he stole a plane. Leishman was recaptured following a shootout in Indiana. He finished serving time for his various crimes in 1975 and became a model citizen following his release. The Flying Bandit's legacy came to a mysterious end when he vanished during a Mercy flight in 1979. He was declared legally dead 5 years later, and his body was never found. Thanks for watching. Which one of these heists shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.